Chris Thompson, digital journalist for Motor Magazine, and this is the new Ford Fiesta ST. We're joined by Associate Editor Scott Newman today because he drove the last one a fair bit, and so he'll be able to tell us what's different about this one from the last one.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Scott.
Yes, we're very lucky today to have the Ford Fiesta ST in our studio, way ahead of launch. Thank you, Ford Australia. It won't be here until the Q1 2020, but this is a prototype brought in for homologation and gives us a good chance to have a poke around the car. It's been out for a while in Europe. This is our first chance to have a look at the Australian spec, Australian pricing, all the gear that's going to be in it, and give you guys a good idea of what you're going to be seeing in showrooms in about 6 months' time. Chris, where do we start?
Well, I think we should probably start with what's the major differences about this car. Things like the engine and the interior. So do we want to talk about the engine first?
Let's talk about the engine.
So what did the last one have, Scott?
So the last one had a 1.6 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, and it had
134.
It did, but it had overboost. So technically it had 134 kilowatts and 250 newton meters, I believe.
240.
240, pretty close. But on overboost, and essentially it had overboost all the time because it had 20 seconds of it. It had 147 kilowatts, I think, and 290 newton meters. So this one, very similar power figures, but it's got that all the time. But what's very different is the engine itself.
This one has a 1.5 litre 3-pot. So it's still turbocharged, but it actually makes more power than the old, slightly bigger engine did.
Yeah, so essentially they're getting the same engine, same power or more power, because they can do it all the time, out of a smaller engine, one less cylinder.
Yes, so this one makes all the time, I'll find it, 147 kilowatts and 290 newton meters. And that's out of, the smaller engine, turbocharged.
And I happen to have I was printed out the technical data here because there's too many specs in here for me to remember everything. And it allows us to give you a few really deep dive specs on this engine. So what we've got is a 1497 cc's, it's 9.7 to 1 compression. Boost isn't listed, but obviously boost on top of that. We've got a aluminium head, aluminium block, peak powers at 6,000 RPM, revs to, I think we'll have a look at in a minute, probably revs about 6.5, and torque is across from 1,600 to 4,000 RPM. So it's got maximum torque from 1,600 RPM, pretty impressive. So we've got a torquey little engine, lots of boost, but power over a very broad spread.
Should we have a look at the engine bay?
Why not? Yes, let's look at the engine bay.
Oh, smooth, up there straight away.
Now, if we were an engineer, we'd be able to tell you all sorts of things, but we're not. So the big thing about it though is it's so tiny. It's such a teeny tiny little engine. So it's basically the engine itself is here. We've got the battery over here and air intake and stuff like that. So good for weight distribution. We've got a smaller, lighter engine, front wheel drive car. Should be help the nose turn in. So, and apart from that, we've got the turbo buried down there somewhere. This cool foam cover that's on here, apparently for sound insulation as well, because 3-cylinder engines tend to be a bit not super smooth. So, well, they're smooth, but they can be a bit thrummy and stuff like that. So
yes, it's a smaller engine, but it does sound pretty good. It sounds like a thrummy little 3-pot, so let's start it up and see what it sounds like. Jump in. Whoa. So that's the sound just in normal mode, but this is actually the first Fiesta ST to have drive modes. So if I drop it into sport, we get the active exhaust, changing the note a little bit, and then back into normal, it's a little bit quieter. Sounds good. Should I give it a rev?
So, one key thing about this new Fiesta ST is, I couldn't do that in the last one because it was 3-door only. Whereas now we've got 5-door. 5-door only is coming to Australia. You can get a 3-door in Europe. Essentially it's the same car. Back seat's the same, front seat's the same, all the room is the same, but it's just got easier access. Probably a smart choice on Ford's part to broaden its appeal to more families. In the back here, it's pretty tight. I'm 5'11", so pretty normal size. Knee room's a bit tight, headroom's a little bit tight. Certainly though, if you had kids back here, you'd have no problems at all. So Chris, tell me a little bit about what's going on up front here.
All right, well, first impression is that it's actually really nice in here. A lot nicer than the last generation, you tell me?
Yes, absolutely.
Big thing is Sync 3, Ford's newest infotainment system, which is actually quite nice to use. We've been playing around with it a little bit.
Yeah, touchscreens sort of seems to work a bit slicker than some of its other units, and the graphics are good, it's nice and clear.
Yeah, it looks good, works well. There's also a lot of nice little plush features in here, like heated seats, a heated steering wheel, a heated windscreen as well, I think.
yeah, we think there's a button in there that seems to be a heated windscreen, but we haven't been able to confirm that yet. But certainly you've got a lot of other kit in here. Like you've got heated seats, Recaro seats, you've got a heated steering wheel, leather steering wheel, you've got a nice dash, everything in here feels pretty good.
10-speaker Bang & Olufsen system with a subwoofer.
Yeah, so even though it's a small car, it's a relatively cheap car, they've tried to put as much kit in it. Like in Europe, there's three grades, ST1, ST2, ST3.
And we've been given ST3.
We've been given all the bells and whistles as sort of one spec.
Other changes in here from the previous generation that you might be able to tell me about, aside from one that I do know about, is the fact that this is the first Fiesta ST to have drive modes, as I mentioned before, and the little buttons down here, proof of that.
Yeah, so the last Fiesta ST, so that Fiesta came out in like 2010 or something like that, and it had this sort of weird Nokia smartphone style, or not even smartphone, sort of old school phone style. There was buttons everywhere on the dash. It was kind of confusing to use. It was a bit tricky to get your head around. This is a big leap forward, and also in materials. That felt like a small, cheap budget car, which was fine because that's what it was. Whereas this feels almost like a sort of small premium car a little bit, partly because we're not getting the base Fiestas in Australia, we're only getting this one. So you don't have that standard car to use as a reference. You've got this one spec, and yeah, this is a really, really big step forward over the previous model car.
It's interesting that you mention it's a premium feeling small hatchback, because its pricing actually puts it directly on par with another premium small hatchback.
That's right. It's a good time to cover that off. So it's $31,990. Yep, $31,990, which is exactly the same price as a VW Polo GTI. So the Polo, I suppose most people would say VW is a premium brand. Ford maybe not so much, but I mean this interior is every bit, I think, as sort of nice as the VWs. The difference is VW is automatic dual clutch only, whereas this is a manual gearbox.
And it's a nice shift feel from what we can gather here sitting still in the studio.
That's right, we're not allowed to drive this car because it's a prototype car. Only Ford people can drive this car, so we'll have to wait for our turn. But that's the thing, like that's quite a big jump over the previous Fiesta ST. That was sort of 26, 27 grand. So the 32 might come as a shock. It'll be interesting to see how it goes in the market, because sitting here, it's worth it. Like, this is a much nicer car, but people were used to, I think, the Fiesta being a sort of cheap and cheerful performance car. Now it's a little bit more money. It's, exactly a direct rival for that VW.
There is also a way to make it more expensive. You can have a panoramic sunroof for $2.5 grand.
That's right.
$2,500.
And the paint is about the only other option is the paint, which is $650 for everything but white and red.
Excellent. Yes, that's right. White or red. So you can't have the hero colour at its base price, which is this colour.
This is the hero colour, yeah.
Ford Performance Blue.
What else have we got? So we've got Recaro seats. They're a carryover from the last one. The seats aren't a carryover, Recaro are, but these are a wider seat.
Yep.
They're more comfortable. The last ones could be a bit snug, like all right for sort of skinnier people like us, but if you were a larger frame, they could be a bit squishy and a bit uncomfortable. So that's a good step forward. So there's just lots more tech, lots more quality. I like it.
It's a nice place to be.
Yeah. Let's get on to the mechanicals.
Yes, let's jump out and have a look around. All right, so while we're out here, we'll just have a quick look at some of the mechanical aspects of the car. Scotty's the man with the specs though, so I'll let him tell me about things like the brakes and the suspension, but what I can see from here is that it's wearing Michelin Pilot Sport 4s on 18-inch wheels, and they're actually 205/40 tyres, so...
Yeah, so the European spec, you can get 17s, but we get 18s as standard. Again, lots of spec, and we've got Michelin Pilot Sport 4, not 4S, which is kind of the tyre you find on the Mustang, for instance, the Mustang V8, all sorts of cars, AMG, Mercs.
Bigger, heavier cars generally.
Yeah, but it's good because maybe slightly less grip. So this sort of car, more fun at lower speed, which is good. So that's almost promising. You might think more grip, more fun, but
Ford hot hatches have a pretty playful nature anyway,
yeah,
so you
exactly.
don't really want them to be too stuck to the road.
Exactly, you want them to sort of move around a little bit. So we'll start at the rear suspension. So it's a torsion beam, but it's a little bit different to sort of the regular torsion beam you'd just find in a standard car. It's a twist beam. I won't sort of go into the exact details of what that means.
Tell me everything,
yeah,
Scott.
Oh, yes. So it's quite simple, but it works really well. And they've done this thing called force vectoring springs. Bit tricky to get an accurate diagnosis on what this actually means, but essentially it helps support the rear of the car, making it stiffer by leaning into the springs, but without sort of sacrificing ride quality by putting really, really stiff springs in. So theoretically, it's the best of both worlds. We'll find out when we drive it. At the brakes, at the back, we've got very, very simple brakes. We've got solid discs, 253 millimeters, but all the weight's at the front, so that's where all the stopping power needs to be. So we'll move on up there. Slightly different brakes up here, 278 millimeter discs, and they're ventilated, so help with cooling. Front end is a McPherson strut, pretty standard. The dampers are not adjustable. They don't change with the suspension modes like in some cars, but they're not just normal dampers, are they, Chris?
No, they're called frequency selective dampers, and that's supposed to mean that they basically can react without actually being active dampers properly to high and low frequency impacts. Again, that's probably something we'll have to find out exactly how that feels when we're driving it, because you can read it off a press sheet and then, go, okay, what does that really mean? But
yeah, so it sounds like Ford is going for a damper that still manages to change its behaviour a little bit depending on what road you're on, without actually going to the complexity of needing to change the actual damper force.
This car has been out overseas for a little while, but Australia has had its cars delayed, and it wasn't just because they were on a slow boat.
No.
Can you tell me a little bit why that might be?
So Ford has been a bit tight-lipped about this, but from what we can gather, what we believe is Ford wanted the car to come with all the active safety stuff. So this car's got auto emergency braking, it's got blind spot monitoring, all that sort of stuff, all that sort of high-tech active safety gear, which doesn't come standard on European cars. So in order to get the spec that they wanted, Ford needed to wait a little bit until they were willing to produce the cars that they wanted to come here. So that's why there's been a bit of a delay, about 12, 18 month delay over Europe. Hopefully it'll be worth the wait. So again, Aussie cars, we've had to wait for them, but they will come with all that sort of stuff standard, all the active safety gear.
All the bells and whistles.
That's right.
So that means we can expect it to show up around Q1 next year.
Yeah, they're aiming for like a February, March kind of delivery, I think.
And hopefully before that, we'll have our first drive review on local soil, which you'll be able to read at whichcar.com.au/motor. We hope you've enjoyed this first look at the Fiesta ST, but keep up with us there at the site and on our social media to get some updates when they happen. Hello.